Good day, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank you for choosing to view my e-poster for this year's University of Arizona Global Campus Research Symposium. My name is Osama Abdurrahman. In this presentation, we will be discussing extremism, homegrown terrorism, as well as deradicalization as a method to combat these two things. I would also like to mention that this work is foundational work for further research. Before I start, I would like to share a little bit about myself with you. Again, my name is Osama Abdurrahman. Just this last January, I graduated from the University of Arizona Global Campus with a Bachelor of Arts in Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Currently, I work as a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear non-commissioned officer in the New Mexico Army National Guard. Also, just recently, I was accepted at the University of Denver to pursue a Master of Science in Data Science, which I'm really excited to start here very soon. Now I would like to answer a couple of questions. First, what is extremism? And how do we as a society consider an action or a behavior to be extreme? Well, for something to be considered extreme, it really must be compared to something else that we consider normal. So we as a society agree on a set of values and norms to be our cultural, political, and even religious values and norms, and anything far to the left or to the right of that is considered to be extreme. For instance, in some societies, it is frowned upon for a person to marry their first cousin, while other societies, it's not only okay, but sometimes even encouraged. Now, in a society where it's frowned upon to do that action, if someone decides to go ahead and marry the first cousin, that will be considered extreme. Now, the same stands for political and religious extremes as well. It is different from one society to another. It is all dependent on what is considered normal in these societies. Also, at that point, it is important to realize that radicalization is the process through which a person goes to get to one of the extremes, left and right, anything far from that center that society agreed upon. For instance, in our last example, in a society where it is frowned upon to marry first cousin, if someone lives in that society and decides to marry their first cousin, now they must have gone through some kind of radicalization for them to now think that it's okay for them to marry the first cousin. And again, the same stands true for political and religious extremism. The second question is extremism something new in the United States? Simple answer is no, it is not, as extremism and the use of extreme violence have been around for many centuries, even before we became the United States of America. Many shapes of extremism have been observed and recorded throughout history. Tribal, racial, religious, and political extremism, not just in the United States, but all around the world throughout history. However, now extreme activities are more visible due to the openness and availability of different communication channels, which is really a good thing because now we have more data that are made available for us to utilize to potentially prevent future incidents. Besides the cultural aspect, I'm really interested in the psychological aspect of extremism, specifically in the personal construct theory, which is a very deep psychological theory that explains human behavior in general. But what I really like about it is that it takes human behavior, beliefs, and feelings and put it into the context of the environmental factors that affect the things that we believe in and the way that we behave. Also, our lifetime as human beings is full of turning points, major events, things like teenage or adulthood, childhood, infancy, and so on. Things like graduating college, getting fired from a job, leaving town, moving out of country, immigration, and so on. All these are things that are considered major events. And major events like these, or turning points like these, it is so easy for something to happen to invalidate the personal belief system that we reference everything in accordance with. One example that really shows how the personal construct theory explained radicalization is the example of Nidal Hasan. He's a former U.S. Army psychiatrist who was born in Arlington County, Virginia. According to his cousin, Nadir, they were raised in a loosely religious family. They didn't really practice Islam besides major holidays and such. After high school, he enlisted in the Army for 3 years because he was looking for financial stability and he wanted some time to figure out his future plans as far as college. Later on, he commissioned as a psychiatrist in the Army. All of these were major turning points in his life, but the one that really triggered Hassan's radicalization was his mother's death in 2001. That major event took him on a journey to find the most correct version of Islam according to Hassan himself. He saw that as a sign from God that his family was not religious enough, and it was time for him to find the most correct version of Islam and follow it. He also started to isolate himself after the death of his mother, and his relationship with his family started fading away a little bit. That's according to his cousin and colleagues that worked with him in the Army. He then met and stayed in touch with Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a Yemeni American, actually born in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and he was a very charismatic and one of Al-Qaeda's most successful recruiters in America. He spoke both Arabic and English. He was fluent in both, and he knew how to recruit people from the Western world, if you may, into Al-Qaeda. So Hassan's radicalization journey started in 2003 and took him 6 years to get to the point where violence is justifiable in his eyes. He shot and killed 13 and wounded 32 of America's finest on that November day in 2009, of course, in Fort Hood, Texas. The thing that we see in this example is the process that radicalization happens through. There is an invalidation that takes place after a major event, in that case with Hassan's mother's death. I should mention here that this model doesn't just work for Islamic or religious extremism. I believe that it works as long as the radicalized individual used to believe in the same values that the society he or she lives in believes in. That works for political, cultural extremism, as well as other types of extremism. So now what can we do? We must recognize that de-radicalization is a lengthy process in the opposite direction of radicalization. As we saw in the Hassan's example, it took him 6 years to be fully radicalized and commit to the use of extreme violence. That process would take what I call the community stakeholders to actually work. Once the close circle to an individual notice signs of extreme thoughts and abnormal behavior after a major life crisis, they should activate that de-radicalization process. If that close circle for some reason doesn't notice or doesn't do anything with the information they have, and the information gets to law enforcement or intelligence community, they must then activate that de-radicalization process with the help of healthcare professionals and religious and social institutions. That's the only way we can ensure that the de-radicalization process actually works. It's also important to mention that this process is a cognitive, psychological process to provide an alternate personal belief system after that major invalidation that happened to the radicalized individual. As I mentioned earlier, this is foundational work that is intended for further research on developing a framework that includes the community stakeholders to intervene whenever needed. That framework would require further qualitative and quantitative testing to ensure effectiveness. These were the references that I used throughout my research. And please, if you have any questions about my work, reach out to me on my email on the screen. Thank you for watching and have a great day.